October 17th, 2025, 11:43 p.m. By that hour, the building had already settled into the kind of silence schools only have after dark, when every corridor seems longer than it was in daylight, and every closed classroom door looks as if it is keeping something in instead of keeping people out. The renovation crew had gone home before 10. The plastic sheets were hanging over the stairwells, the gym lights were dead, and the lower floor still smelled of wet plaster, old paper, and the colder odor that comes out of concrete after walls have been opened. In the basement archive room, behind a row of metal shelving that had been dragged away from the wall that afternoon, they found a narrow cavity no one had marked on the plans. Inside it sat a cassette recorder coated in a skin of gray dust. The battery should have been gone for years. The red light was still on. At first, it seemed like the sort of thing people leave behind and forget, something useless that survives only because no one remembers to throw it away. The recorder was small, older than the students, older than some of the teachers, the kind with stiff buttons and a speaker grill yellowed by age. When the custodian picked it up, the dust underneath it showed a clean outline on the concrete, as if it had been moved recently and placed back with care. There was a label on the cassette, but the ink had bled into the paper until it looked like a bruise. He pressed stop. Nothing changed. He pressed play, and for a few seconds there was only tape hiss, soft and constant, like someone breathing through their teeth in another room. Then came footsteps. Not running, not wandering, just a measured descent on hollow stairs. Each step was distinct, separated by a pause that felt deliberate, as if whoever was being recorded was counting the distance downward and wanted the listener to count with them. After the steps came a long interval of room tone, that dead, padded silence old microphones collect when they are left in spaces where no one wants to stay. Then a child's voice began listing names in a flat, careful manner, neither frightened nor calm, the way attendance is read when everyone is expected to answer. The names were common, forgettable, but two of them belonged to workers who had been in the building that week. One belonged to the night custodian himself. He replayed that section 3 times before deciding that exhaustion was changing what he heard. The school had been under repair for nearly a month, and fatigue had settled over everyone in a way that made small things feel threatening. Lights failed for no reason. Paint dried in different shades on the same wall. Locks stuck only after sunset. A student had told a teacher there was someone under the basement stairs during lunch break, standing with their face turned toward the wall. When the teacher looked, there was no one there, only a patch of colder air and the smell of damp cardboard. None of that meant anything. Old buildings gather stories because empty rooms make people need explanations. That was what he told himself while the tape kept turning. The second recording was older. You could hear the age in it, not just in the static, but in the depth of the room, as if the ceiling had been lower then or the walls closer together. More footsteps, a chair scraping. Somewhere far off, the metallic clatter of pipes. Then the same child's voice, lower this time, speaking the names again. Not all the same names. Some repeated, some replaced. Years seemed to have separated the recordings, but the voice had not changed at all. No maturing throat, no shift in rhythm, no difference in breath. At the end of that tape, there was a sound like a hand moving slowly over paper, followed by a wet click of the recorder stopping on its own. He should have taken it upstairs immediately. He should have logged it, bagged it, handed it to the principal in the morning, and let it become somebody else's problem under fluorescent lights and formal signatures. Instead, he kept listening in the basement, because the longer he stood there, the less natural it felt to carry the machine through the school. The archive room was narrow and windowless, lined with old records swollen by years of humidity. The ceiling pipes clicked overhead. A string of temporary work lamps cast a weak white light that left the corners untouched. Each time the tape hiss swelled between sounds, the room seemed to answer with its own quieter hiss, from somewhere behind the shelves, too soft to locate, too steady to dismiss. Just after midnight, the motion sensors in the corridor outside shut off, and the strip of light under the archive door disappeared. The darkness beyond the room should have been ordinary. He knew that hallway. He had mopped it, unlocked it, walked it in winter blackouts and spring floods, and the stale heat of August maintenance weeks. But now the absence of light looked occupied, not by a body exactly, not by a shape the eye could hold on to, but by a waiting density that made the doorway feel farther away than it was. He pressed play again only because silence had become worse than sound. The newest cassette had been recorded recently. He knew that before the voices began because there was a faint electrical hum behind the static, the current tone of the renovated wing, a vibration from modern lights and patched wiring. The footsteps were closer to the microphone now, each one carrying the soft drag of grit on concrete. There were 7 steps, a pause, then 4 more. He counted because counting made it seem mechanical, harmless, explainable. After the last step came breathing, very near, too near, the kind that should have overloaded the microphone but did not. Then the child's voice returned and spoke the names of 3 students who were due in the building the next morning for exam preparation. It named the archivist. It named the custodian again. Then it paused long enough for him to think the tape had ended. What came after did not sound like a child. It sounded like someone trying to use a child's breathing pattern without understanding it. Too even, too patient. A second voice, almost beneath the first, began saying the names with a delay of half a second, as if repeating them from farther down a corridor that had no end. He stopped the tape so abruptly the button snapped under his thumb. In the silence that followed, the pipes overhead kept clicking, but they no longer sounded like pipes. They sounded like measured pressure, like weight shifting carefully from one foot to the other, somewhere above the ceiling tiles. When he finally opened the archive room door, the basement corridor beyond it was lit again, though he had not heard the sensors react. The far end led to the disused storage rooms under the older wing, rooms that had been emptied during the renovation and locked with fresh chain. From where he stood, one of those doors now looked slightly ajar. Not open enough to show the dark inside, only open enough to show that the line of shadow was different from what it had been an hour earlier. The floor carried a trail of dust disturbed by recent movement. A thin passage cut through the gray as if something narrow had been walked from the storage rooms toward the archive and then back again without hurrying. He did not follow it. He told himself he was too old for basement superstitions, too tired to trust his eyes. And still he stood there listening for the sound of a child going downstairs beneath a floor that should have had nothing under it. He locked the recorder in the archive cabinet before dawn. At 7:12 a.m., the first teachers arrived. By 7:30, the building had filled with normal noise, lockers, announcements, rubber soles on tile, the living weight of a school forcing the night backward. The recorder should have become ridiculous in daylight. Instead, it became worse. During second period, one of the students from the tape asked why there was dust on the back stairs leading to the basement, because someone had written names in it. By lunch, the marks had been wiped away by passing shoes, but several teachers had already seen them. Some names belonged to current staff. Some belonged to graduates from decades earlier. One belonged to a contractor who had not yet arrived on site that day, but signed in 13 minutes later, pale and sweating, after claiming he had spent the entire morning circling the block because he was sure he had forgotten where the school entrance was. That evening, the archivist asked to hear the tapes. He listened without interrupting, one hand resting on the desk, eyes fixed not on the recorder, but on the strip of darkness beneath the cabinet. When the second voice began echoing the names from somewhere deeper in the recording, he closed his eyes as if recognizing a melody he had hoped never to hear again. He said the basement had been extended in stages over many years, and and that plans were often wrong, that schools keep building downward in small, practical ways until no one remembers which rooms were meant to exist. He said some of the oldest storage spaces had been sealed after flooding, and some after subsidence, and some simply because there was no longer a reason to send anyone there. He never said what had originally been below the archive room. He never had to. The way he looked at the recorder made it clear that it had not been hidden to preserve it. It had been hidden to keep it from continuing. The next tape appeared in the cabinet 3 nights later,